But what I wanted to do, I actually just want to walk through this form, and I'll kind of, let's fill it out together. If anybody has questions as I'm going, let's talk about them. Hopefully answer some questions, clarify a few things. So when you're filling this form out, when you're filling out any form in the file, you've got to remember that thing that your English teacher taught you back in 7th grade, that you have to consider your audience. And your audience in this case is going to be one of the state guys or someone at the federal level. You're documenting all of this for us. Your audience could also be a lawyer because somebody just died and now they're looking at this because they've requested it through a public records request. You know, all of these things are doomsday scenarios, but that is why we are keeping these records, is, you know, so that we can show that we did our job correctly. So bear that in mind, and you know, when you're looking at this and you're going, well, why in the world do I need to check this box? It just seems so unnecessary. Consider your audience. I try to, my audience is always a federal auditor who knows nothing about weatherization. So I try to make things as clear as I possibly can for that person, in the hopes that anybody else could pick this up and read it and make sense of it. So with that in mind, as a general rule, you just need to fill out everything. Like, fill in every blank that you possibly can when you're filling out a form. So let's go ahead and fill this form out for a Bob Smith. This job number box would be probably the only box that I don't care if you fill out, but you may like to fill that out at your agency, or your coordinators may want you to fill that out because that's how you guys keep track of your jobs. My goal is to have some sort of identifier on the form so that I know very clearly which job this form goes to. So you either need a client name or a job number or both to be thorough. So make sure you're filling those out. You need to put, the technician is the person that actually conducted the test. So if I am the one that did this worst case draft test, then I'm going to put my name on here, and you want to put the date of the test, and we'll say the date of the test is this morning.
Can I interject here real quick? One thing we see, me and Dalton see in our monitoring, and it's we're constantly reminding people, is complete and accurate paperwork. And we see a lot of paperwork with missing signatures, no technician, no one signed it. And so we'll be hitting you for that stuff, reminding you, I guess is a better word than hitting you. We'll be reminding you about complete and accurate paperwork, especially signing your name to it. Someone's got to sign off, hey, I checked this, hey, I did this type of stuff. So that's important. It's another thing we're just seeing some areas where we're maybe a little weak in, is complete and accurate paperwork.
Yeah, I second what Wade said. That's, unfortunately, that's a lot of what we have to monitor too, is making sure that everything was filled out properly. Okay, so this next section, I put this in here because of exactly what Wade was just talking about. I started going through client files where I would see like 2 or 3 copies of a worst case draft test, and there was no indication of when the test took place, like at what stage it took place. Hopefully there was usually like a date of the test somewhere on the test, and then I could kind of line them up. But even then, sometimes the dates wouldn't align with the date that the audit took place or the date that the audit was first run. And just poor documentation left way too many questions in some of these files. So you're putting the date that you've conducted the test here, and then here you're going to select basically the stage that the test happened at. For auditors, you're just going to check pre-weatherization. If it's someone who's out in the field, you've conducted some major measures that will have an impact on the pressure of the home before you leave for the day, you're going to perform a worst case test. you'd just check here and you'd say, well, you know, after we installed Windows. So that's why that box is there, so that you can check the box and then you can just write down what happened. And then that way, you know, the next day you might be insulating the house and you could check the box and put insulation, and now you have a very clear track record of what happened at each step and how each step, you know, impacted the pressure in the Kaz and whether or not your appliances were drafting. And then your post-weatherization, that's at your final, or that's your QCI is conducting that. So you can check that box there. If you're checking, go ahead.
I'm just wondering where that's located at.
What do you mean?
Where's the form located at? Because
Oh,
I got,
the form?
you said it's on the new, or on the IWTC Training Center site. So I just looked there and I don't see it.
Okay. Brad and I actually talked about this last week, and I did not go through and verify that all of our forms are there. So I will make sure that this form gets put there this week, and I'll send out an email to this group once that's done. So if you don't have this form, I'll make sure there's a link there, and so you can access that this week.
All right, thanks.
I think if you go to the old website, it may be there, but I am not even certain on that. I know there's just been a few times where I've just emailed this form out. So.
And I think Brad was going to kill the old website
Yeah.
real soon, so you might not even be able to get to the old website anymore.
It's still there as of this morning. But yeah, it's going to go away. But yeah, thank you for that, because it's that kind of stuff. Like, you'd think that we would think of that, and sometimes we just forget stuff like that. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Anyway, so just select the testing stage. We'll pretend that this is during weatherization, that we just installed the Windows today, and we conducted our test when we left. So the next section on the form is that basically you're going to calculate your minimum acceptable draft pressure. And we're going to calculate that so we know what our target is, what we're shooting for these appliances to draft at. And to do that, I have not put the math on this form. When you do your audit and your QCI certifications, you should become very familiar with the formula. It's basically just outdoor temperature minus 40.
Outdoor temperature divided by 40
and then minus 2.75. On the long form, the formula is written out. On this form was designed so this morning in Logan at the airport, it was 35 degrees. So if I was conducting this test this morning at 7 a.m. when it was 35 degrees, then this form should calculate your minimum acceptable draft. Now, I have run into those agencies or some auditors who are having troubles where the form is not calculating this basically because of the app that they're using. So check and make sure that your form is calculating it. If it is not, I built this with using Adobe software, so I would say consider using Adobe apps to read it or to use it. The other app that we use is, what's the PDF viewer or whatever we use on our...
I use PDF Expert.
PDF
Exchange.
Yeah, on an Apple product, we use PDF Expert, which also reads... This is just a little bit of... I can't even think of the code. Anyway, it's some standard computer code, so you'd think that most apps will read it, but some do not. So the first time or two that you use this, do the math yourself and check it, make sure that is working. But so anyway, if it's working well, then the goal is that you just put the temperature in here, and that's in Fahrenheit, and it'll do the math for you, and it'll tell you what your minimum acceptable draft is. Now, I kind of debated on whether to do that before you do your worst case depressurization or after. because it's really, you're going to use this number down here when we're talking about our worst case pressure in the vent of the appliance. But I like to know what that is before I start other things. So hopefully that doesn't confuse anybody. But that's where I put it on the form. The other thing I put on the form is I just tried to do some shorthand to remind you for your setup, for your Kaz Depressurization. So these are the general steps for setup. It just says, just as a reminder, you have to have a cold vent. Your combustion appliances should be off. You want to put the home in wintertime conditions. Your interior doors should be open. Your exterior vents should be closed. Your wintertime condition puts all your exterior windows and doors closed as well. Your furnace filter should be clean. Your dryer should be empty, and the filter on the dryer should be clean. So if you're ever looking for steps on how to do that, they're listed in detail on the long form. They're summarized right there. And then, so the next step is your Kaz Depressurization. And to start that, you're going to list your starting Kaz pressure. So let's say that our starting Kaz pressure is a 1.2.
Negative or positive?
That's positive. And yeah, Wade just asked if that's negative or positive, and that is key here. You've got to make sure that you put the sign, you know, off of your manometer, indicating what the actual pressure is. Another thing before I get into the worst case depressurization, I put these check boxes here where you can indicate whether or not a tech log is attached and whether or not there was more than one Kaz. So if you ever run into an issue where there's more than one Kaz, you're going to have to go through the depressurization on each Kaz. So if I was to check the multiple Kaz box, then I would be, the federal auditor or the state auditor would then know, wait a second, okay, after they installed the windows, there should be two forms or one or more than one form on this house where they did the Kaz depressurization test on both of those Kazes. So I'd be looking for more than one document if that was checked. And then if the tech log is attached, then by checking that box when you're done with this form and when you've signed it down here, again, if this went to court, then you've signed here and this document says that it would have a tech log attached, and all of those pieces would be put together as one legal document. So that's really why that's there. Just if you ever need it, that's why it's there. Okay, so Kaz depressurization, our starting pressure is a positive 1.2. So the first step we're gonna take is we're gonna go through the house and we're gonna turn on all of our exhaust fans. And we're gonna watch our manometer and we're gonna see what kind of impact that has on the pressure in the Kaz. Now if I was to turn on exhaust fans and it dropped my pressure down to a 0.8, so we're still positive, but it's lower than before, and that happened when I turned the exhaust fans on. So I'm going to indicate that the exhaust fans were on and that the pressure went to a 0.8. The next step is we're going to leave the exhaust fans on. Now we're going to turn that dryer on. The dryer's empty, the filter's clean, so it's going to be able to exhaust the most air. And we're going to see if that has any impact on the Kaz. So we turn our dryer on and that drops us down to a negative 0.4. So again, I want to indicate that the dryer is on, and then we're going to log our pressure. The next step is we come to the air handler. Now we're going to turn our air handler on, and if the air handler pushed our pressure up to a 1.2, then what would we do? Anybody out there in the void have an answer to that? What should we do on this form?
Turn it back off.
Turn it back off, and then what? What do I put on the form?
Off.
And what goes here?
The back to what it was before. The -0.4.
Correct. So by doing that, I can now see that the action that put the Kaz in the worst depressurization was to leave the air handler off, and the pressure in the Kaz when the air handler was off was at a -0.4. This, I'm seeing a little bit of confusion with this. If you were to turn your, if you put it on and you showed that it went back up to a positive, that shows me that it is, well, if you record it that way and then you moved on to the next step, that leaves me with questions about whether or not you really put the Kaz into the most negative condition. Because the last thing we want to see is that this was at a positive 1.4 and then you went on and closed the Kaz doors, right? That means you didn't do your depressurization properly.
That will start us asking questions. And we've seen, in fact, when we're done here, I'll talk a little bit about some examples that me and Dalton have seen out in the field. And so,
anyway, so yeah, that's absolutely correct. You'd indicate that the air handler was off, and you'd log the Kaz pressure when it's off in its worst case. I realize that in most cases your exhaust fans, your dryer, and they'll typically be on, but there are weird scenarios, and that's why I put the option here so that you can clearly indicate whether they're on or whether they're off. So please make sure you're filling that out correctly, because that's information that we must have in order to determine, and put the Kaz in its worst case. So the next one is fireplaces. Now, we made some policy changes a little while ago, and we had a discussion about going back and changing this form, and when I went back to look at the form, I realized there was no change needed. So the change in the policy is that that you no longer have to simulate a fireplace if the fireplace is not the primary source of heat, or if the fireplace doesn't get used that much. If you go into a home and you see that they are using it on a regular basis, you need to simulate the fireplace. Or more importantly, if the fireplace is their primary source of heat, you must simulate the fireplace as part of your worst case or your Kaz depressurization. So if there's one fireplace, it's you're going to 300 Pascal of, or 300 CFM of negative.
Use your blower door. Use your blower door to simulate an exhaust fan, so depressurize. 300 CFM per fireplace is the industry standard.
So if there's two fireplaces, I'm running my blower door to negative 600
CFM. Yep.
Yeah.
And we all know what the end result will be. Okay? I mean, we've seen it time and time again. We all know what that end result's going to be, but we've got policy in place to address that with the client.
Now, one thing here, so I've just selected one, and then I accidentally selected it. I want to deselect it. This form won't let you deselect it. So if there is no fireplace in the home, or the fireplace is rarely or never used, all you need to do is put an NA in the box. If you accidentally select this, or if you feel like you need to give some further explanation, use the notes box down here to help clarify what's going on the form. So on the fireplaces, you'd either indicate that there is a fireplace, and then you'd note your Kaz pressure, or you'd just say it doesn't apply. Kaz doors open or closed. This is the one where you always need to test it, and it may not be limited to your, you may have multiple doors that really impact the Kaz. You're going to have to determine that. If you had multiple doors, again, you've got the notes section where you could describe more what's going on. But in this case, let's say when our Kaz door is open, then, let's say when it's closed, that it pushes our Kaz down to a negative 1.3. And then this last section is just other, like if there's anything else in the home, if there's something weird that they've got going on that is not easily represented here, you've got a space to do that. I've used this a time or two for other doors that, I might say that the door at the top of the stairs or something. But in this case, you can either leave these two blank if you want to, or you can just put none or NA over here. And then when you're all done, the number that you're going to put in here is the worst case Kaz pressure, which in this case was what?
1.3.
That's as negative as we could possibly get that Kaz, was down to a negative 1.3. So that's our answer right there. Now, what does this number have to do with this number? Nothing, right?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay. Just check and make sure you guys are awake out there. All right, and then now we're on to testing our appliances.
Before you move on,
yeah.
I just want to mention, because I know you guys are going to hear about it, because we do the BPI certification. BPI in their new 1200 standard is eliminating Kaz depressurization testing. They used to have the standards, and all of you that have been through the tests know -3 for an orphaned water heater, -5 for a standalone water heater, so on and so forth. BPI is getting rid of that, but that doesn't mean that we stop doing this, because this is like being a detective. We're trying to find out what could possibly be causing the spillage. So knowing this information guides you. It may be that your negative Kaz pressure is indeed causing your spillage. It may be something else. But going through this process gives you the clues, gives you, okay, I can see, I turn the dryer on and suddenly my Kaz goes very, very negative. That's a clue that possibly your dryer is what's causing your problem. And it allows you to formulate some kind of solution. So although you're going to hear BPI is eliminating the Kaz depressurization standards, that doesn't mean that we're going to stop doing this.
Knowing that they were eliminating it, I actually put the Kaz depressurization standard into the auditor guidelines. I think it's very valuable information. It is a guideline. If your Kaz is a -5 and you've got that standalone water heater, it's okay. It's just an indication of something else, and so we're going to continue to teach it and use it. So now we're going to measure our draft pressure. Now that our Kaz is in the worst, or the most depressurized we can get it. Did somebody have a comment?
Yeah, I did, Matt. It's Brent.
Yeah.
So to get your worst case, and you're following that form,
yeah,
I think you need to check your Kaz door with your air handler running.
Yes.
Even if it says that it goes to a less negative pressure, and you turn it off, when you shut that Kaz door, you need to check that with the air handler running.
That's a great point. Under most scenarios, if you'll just follow steps 1 through 8, that works most of the time. But what Brent's saying is every once in a while, your Kaz doors, like if your air handler is off and you tested your Kaz doors first, it'll actually indicate some other weird pressure thing going on, and then your air handler could push it positive or negative. And so sometimes you need to test these things in different order. The training center is a great example because you can get it to do that.
And we've been kind of teaching you guys that, when you turn on that air handler, that's all good and fine, but you've also got to throw those doors into the equation. And when we're all done here, we'll talk about a scenario that me and Dalton ran into out in the field that just was kind of a shocker to everyone. But you've got to, Brent's exactly right. You can have an air handler that, depending on the condition of the doors, maybe causes your Kaz to go more positive. But then when the air handler's running and you close those doors, now all of a sudden you're in a negative condition. And that's why I keep harping on, you've got to be a detective here. You've got to do some sleuthing. To just check the boxes is not enough. It would be very hard for us to make a form that covered every scenario because it'd be very cumbersome. I like this short form, but you still need to be aware of the fact, turn that air handler on, turn that stuff on, and play with your door closure, because we've seen it in the field in our monitoring, and it's, you know, just the QCI or the auditor thought they had developed worst case, when in actuality they did not, because they missed the door closure while something was running. So it's imperative that you go through the process, be the detective, understand the physics and science behind it, and play with the door closure, because Brent is spot on.
Thanks. Just really quick, we're getting very close to 9 a.m., so we will continue this training right now. And I want to take time for questions and stuff, but if you've got work, if you got a job you got to get to or something else going on, feel free to drop off the call. I will send a recording of this out in an email later today, so you can catch the tail end of it when it's convenient for you. Okay, so we're going to measure our draft pressure. Let's start with a water heater. And while the Kaz is in its most negative, we measure our cold vent pressure. So we haven't fired the appliance yet. And give me a good cold vent pressure.
Under worst case, let's call it positive 1.5.
So Wade's given us 1.5. So that's with our probe where?
12 to 18 inches above the draft hood or past the first elbow in the flue. I understand you can't always get there because of the physical condition of your flue, but do your best to get 12 to 18 inches above the draft hood or past the first elbow in the flue.
All right. And then, so we fire the water heater, and after 60 seconds, hopefully we got the, what do you call that, the curve of glory or something like that? I can't remember what you're calling it. Anyway, within that 60-second time period, and BPI may extend that standard to 2 minutes, but as of right now, we're measuring vent pressure after 60 seconds. And if your appliance is working well, then we should see it go negative. And let's say that it goes to negative 2.3. So if we get there, it goes to negative 2.3, the next thing is you need to document that you actually thought and made a decision, did this pass or fail? Was this draft acceptable or not? So in this case, what was it acceptable?
Yes.
What are we comparing it to?
Negative 1.8.
Yeah,
6.
our minimum acceptable draft. So if it's more negative than negative 1.88, then yes, it passes. Now, say we had a furnace sitting next to it, and it's an old 60%er, and our starting vent pressure was weird, and let's say it was really positive. And after a 60-second test on this vent, we were at a negative 0.2. Did this one pass?
Tell them you want to start with the smallest BTU.
Oh yeah, Dalton's saying remember to start with the smallest BTU appliance. And then the other thing that makes this test, you know, a little cumbersome is that once you started with that, if these two share a flue, you have to wait until you have a cold vent or a cold flue. You have to wait till that flue gets back down to room temperature. So this test can take a little while if you've got
On your blower door
appliances. Yeah, if your blower door is there, you can negatively pressurize the house and suck air through the blower door, or suck air through the vent and help cool it down quicker. But so if this one fails, then we're going to indicate that it fails. And then you'll notice on this form I just put this box around here just to help you go, oh, well, it failed. Now I have to go back and do this test. So if it fails, then you want to go back and do it under normal case, which means your Kaz will not be depressurized. So you'll turn off your exhaust fans, you'll turn off your dryer fan, you'll put the house just into normal conditions. You'll wait till the vent has cooled, you'll measure your vent pressure again, and then you'll, let's say our vent pressure under normal condition is a 1.5, and you'll, or sorry, let's make that a negative 1.5. Now, this one is, this is again your vent pressure after 60 seconds. This is not your cold vent pressure. It's just your, under normal case, after 60 seconds, what happened to your vent pressure, and then you have to determine whether it passed or failed. So in this case, did it pass or fail?
Failed.
Yeah, this one failed under normal case. It failed under worst case. If it fails, one of the things I want you to do is I want you to write down your CO level right here on this form because it's part of the decision. So let's say our CO level on this appliance is 25 parts per million. Now, we're going to come down here. Once we've run our test, you need to come to a conclusion. And so the conclusion is, the first one, there are no combustion appliances in the dwelling, so no further testing was required. So if you ever run into a house that's all electric, then you can check that box. You can document it one time, and you don't have to run your test anymore, right? But we want you to actually document in the file. So that would be your auditor would document that the first time they're in the home, and then everybody after that does not have to deal with it. The next option is that the conclusion is not applicable because all combustion appliances are direct vented. So you could come to a home where they're all direct vented, or at some point during your weatherization, the home would get to a point where they're all direct vented appliances and you wouldn't need any further testing. The guy who installs that appliance is the last guy that would fill this out. So he would fill that out for that day, check that box, and that should be in the file indicating that, we did our worst case testing right up to the point where we didn't need to do it anymore. Next conclusion is pass. So everything passed, right? And all combustion appliances passed the worst case draft test and they're venting safely. If you ever have to check fail, then you need to write a conclusion as to why it failed. So in this case, we'd write a corrective action plan. And this says one or more combustion appliances failed worst case draft test, see corrective action plan below. So in this case, and then we're going to name the appliance. We're going to say the furnace has been either disabled or left in service. In this case, what are we going to do with the furnace? Well, it was this morning in Logan, so it's a little chilly. Based on what we have here, would you guys disable it or would you leave it in service?
I would say disable it.
The answer is depends. Depends on what's going on at your agency.
Take a look at our numbers. So our minimum draft pressure, that we need to achieve is negative 1.8, correct? Now, we did not achieve our minimum draft pressure, but we are venting because we're negative. So we are a negative 1.5, albeit we are not at our minimum acceptable draft pressure, but the furnace is venting still, and our CO levels are low, correct? So in this case, if it were me, and your agency can have its own policy on this, but if it were me, I would just note this and not disable it, because the furnace is still venting. It's just not venting at negative 1.8, but I'm at negative 1.5, and my CO is relatively low. So I would note this furnace failed based solely off of draft pressure. It's not spilling, but it failed based off of draft pressure, and the CO is low. So if it was me, I would leave it in service, because we know it's not an immediate someone's going to die type of situation. Yes, it fell based on that, but it's not going to kill anyone immediately. Now, your agency may have a policy. Doesn't matter. It fails, it fails. Doesn't matter how it fails, why it fails, what it fails. You disable it. I think in some situations, disabling it is a little extreme, especially if it's really cold outside. In this case, we know that furnace isn't going to kill anyone immediately. So just my 2 cents worth.
So let's take, and the point here is that whoever's in the field, between you and your coordinators, you need to make a decision about it and then document your decision. And that's why I want you guys to put the CO level there so that you've got all the information here and you can come up with a good answer.
Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum while we're talking about it. Let's say our vent pressure on that furnace after 60 seconds under normal conditions, this is not worst case, was a positive 1.5 and my CO was 300 parts per million. Then what would you do?
Turn it off.
Yeah, then I'd be disabling it because now that thing is spilling copious amounts of CO into the house, and I probably don't want to leave that there for the client. So I would more than likely disable it and develop an action plan, an immediate action plan to take care of it.
Would you allowed to get a completion sign?
So if we disabled it, we'll go through the left in service, but if we disabled it and you had a client's signature there and a technician's signature and the client died the next day and you're in court a month later and you have this document, that's your get out of jail free card.
Yep.
Left notarized, notarized.
That again, doomsday scenario, that is one of the reasons why we're documenting all this. So in this scenario, if say that you've made the decision to leave it in service and you're going to leave it in service for the following reasons. So you need to document the furnace failed. It's off of draft pressure, but it is venting and the CO is low. The weatherization agency will what? You need to write down what you're going to do and you need to write down what the client is going to do. This will typically represent any client ed that you've given them. So the weatherization agency will return within 3 days to repair the furnace. The client will what? What kind of advice would we give the client if we were going to leave this in service? Is there anything that they need to know?
Don't run the dryer.
Say one of these appliances was really causing some major depressurization. You know, if it was the dryer, then that could be part of what the client will do. So,
And that, guys, is why we have to go through the process and check. I mean, this is really what it boils down to. If you determine through your testing, through being the detective, hey, the dryer in conjunction with this door being closed is what causes this appliance to become dangerous, it's perfectly fine to educate the client and say, hey, look, client, here's what causes the dangerous situation. We won't be able to get back for 2 weeks, so in the meantime, don't create this situation. We'll come back and fix it. And as long as you document that, you're pretty good to go.
I was in a home where we had an appliance that was backdrafting, and we found that by cracking the kitchen window and putting it back into worst case, we ran it through the test with the kitchen window open, and it had a nice strong draft. So what we did was while we were there, we cut a block of wood to keep the window from sliding open so that, you know, they couldn't get robbed. And we had the client sign that they would leave their kitchen window open until we returned. And the client signed the signature there. And I like this because when I do it on my tablet, I literally emailed the client a copy of this right while I was sitting in their kitchen. But I had them sign that, and now we have a very clear corrective action plan. The client knows what we're doing. You guys know what you're doing, and you've written it all down. And then just be aware, this box with the client's signature, it's only when it fails. We don't need a client's signature when everything else passes, only when it fails. So you've written your plan, you have the client sign it, and that's it on our corrective action plan. There's the notes field, so you can, if you have notes that if you need further explanation, use that. And then the last thing on this form, which is required every time, is what Wade talked about earlier, is that whoever conducted this test needs to sign their name to it. That's how we know that you're not just photocopying this form. And that's where you as a technician, you as an auditor or a QCI or a field guy, you take ownership of this. You're documenting, you put your name on there, you're saying this is exactly what I found. And then you put the date that you signed it, which typically should be the same date as the date the test was conducted. So now be aware, technicians, when you sign this, make sure that it's filled out correctly and make sure that you feel good about putting your name on that, because again, doomsday worst case scenario, if there were ever issues with this, you could lose certifications from the state. So make sure you're doing your job properly, because we don't ever want it to go there. We just want these forms filled out and everybody doing things correctly. Any questions on this form or concerns about it?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
What if this fails worst case and passes normal case?
That same thing, like when you come down here, anytime it fails, so you've selected fail here, then you need to write a corrective action plan. So say we only had a water heater and it failed under worst case, but it's drafting under normal conditions. What other information would we want to know about that water heater? Here's a hint. We'd want to know how much CO it's putting out, right?
And also, what did it fail with?
What caused it to fail? Is that what you're saying, or are you saying the...
Yeah, like what caused it to fail? Like, was it the exhaust fan, whatever it's not?
Yeah, and your testing up above will give you those clues.
Yeah, that we should have an indication up here. So you're going to put all those pieces of the puzzle together in your corrective action plan. So you could say my water heater has been left in service because it's drafting normally or drafting well under normal conditions, and the CO is low, and the weatherization agency will do whatever you're going to do, and the client will do whatever the client's going to do. So does that answer your question? Like if it passes under normal case, that's okay. It's still failed, so you're still going to write a corrective action plan, but you can leave it in service sometimes.
Yeah, so long as the client understands what worst case is. So again, we go back to what was said before. Perhaps worst case, or the thing that's causing it to backdraft under worst case, is the dryer in a door position. So then you go and do it under normal conditions with the dryer off and that door open, or whatever the case may be, and it vents just fine. So your corrective action plan, until you can get back to correct worst case, is, hey client, here's what causes your water heater to backdraft: running your dryer and closing this door. Don't do those two things at the same time, okay? We'll come back and fix this. It might take us a week to get back, but you know that the only time it's dangerous is under worst case, and you can provide the client with guidance to not create those conditions until you get back, and have them sign that you explained it to them and that they understand. Now, if it backdrafts under worst and normal case and the CO is high, that's probably where you need to look at disabling the equipment.
If you have questions about any of these, reach out to your coordinators, reach out to Wade or Dalton or myself. You know, we can put our heads together and usually come up with a good answer. So, any other questions on this one, or anybody have best practices or suggestions that we haven't addressed here? All right. Well, hopefully this was helpful. Did we cover?
I've got just one thing I want to cover, and I'll try to make it quick here, guys. I know we're way over time. But we ran into a situation now in our monitoring a couple of times, a unique situation that kind of surprised everyone. So I was going to try to have a PowerPoint with pictures for you, because pictures make this easier to understand, but let's see if I can paint a picture in your head for you. So imagine you're in a house, and the house has a window-mounted swamp cooler in a bedroom, okay? And in that same bedroom is a supply register in the floor from the furnace system, okay? So what do you think in that house with that situation, that bedroom with a swamp cooler in it, a window-mounted swamp cooler, and a supply register in the floor, what is going to be worst case condition when you run your Kaz test? Is it going to be with that bedroom door open or that bedroom door closed, and why? Who can identify that and explain the reason behind it for me?
Was the swamp cooler taped off?
Nope, the swamp cooler was not taped off. We left it in its normal conditions because it was summertime when we were there, so the swamp cooler had wide open vents, okay?
That makes worst case more negative.
When what happens? Give me more detail, a little more.
Turn the air handler on. Yeah, when the air
And?
handler's on, because it's blowing that.
Where's the bedroom door?
Where's the bedroom door position? Open or closed?
Closed.
Closed, okay? So we ran into this a couple of times, and again, let me explain it so hopefully you can understand.
Unless the air conditioner was
I thought we were supposed to close off everything to the outside before we did that, so that air conditioner, the swamp cooler would be closed off before you started the
It
test.
would be, but you'd want to test it again because this is what we found, okay? And you're right on track there, Jason. Yeah, normally you'd go out and close the swamp cooler off because it's providing combustion air to the house. But here's what we found, and here's why I wanted to bring this to your guys' attention. Under normal conditions, that bedroom door, there is a possibility that it could be closed and that swamp cooler is not closed off, okay? And that the client does turn the furnace on, and we're getting into that time of season when it could happen. So they've got this window-mounted swamp cooler just sitting there with no kind of way to effectively close it off from the outdoors, if you will. And that bedroom door is closed, and they turn the air handler on. Because that supply register is in that bedroom, with that bedroom door closed, that supply register is now blowing a ton of air to the outdoors. And that's exactly the same thing as an exhaust fan. So we ran into this situation a couple of times now, and it was kind of an eye-opener for all of us. We went, wow. And in both cases, that condition created massive negative pressure. Because think about it, a supply register can deliver 150 to 175 CFM. And if that's all blowing to the outdoors, it's the same exact thing as having a 150 to 175 CFM exhaust fan operating in the house. So we wanted to bring it to your attention because some of you will probably run into that. Now, would you normally block that swamp cooler off when you do your Kaz testing? Yes, you would, but you also want to take that tape off and test this situation if you run into this configuration. And again, it was a window-mounted swamp cooler in a back bedroom.
They didn't have a cover.
And they had no cover for it. You know the kind of equipment we run into, so we got this window-mounted swamp cooler with a great big hole, no cover for it, and it's perfectly conceivable that especially this time of year where it's starting to get chilly, that client closes the bedroom door. They're not going to put any kind of cover or anything over their swamp cooler. Maybe if we're lucky, they'll stick a pillow in it. And they turn the furnace on. And all of a sudden, that creates this big negative pressure. So we just wanted to bring it to your attention because it's this weird anomaly that we found twice now. And we suspect we'll run across it again. But just so you guys are aware of it, if you run into that condition, test that theory, untape that swamp cooler, close that bedroom door, and turn the furnace on and see what happens. We were really surprised at how negative it made the house go.
And that'd be a great,
I mean, it took our Kaz from a -1 to like a -5
Yeah.
or -6.
Yeah, our Kaz on the last one we ran into was a -1, and then when we created that condition with the swamp cooler in the bedroom, we went to a -6. I mean, that's big time.
that'd be a great example of how you would use the other box here on the form. You document what's going on with your swamp cooler and then the effect on the Kaz pressure. So.